So we will be recording today's session. So let me just get that up and running to make sure that any resources that are shared will be able to disseminate after today's session. So with our recording starting, let's hop into how we will connect throughout today's session. So many of you might already be familiar with this platform we're using. It's called Zoom. But we'd like to highlight two features that we'll be using a little bit more throughout today's session to make sure we're able to chat and answer any questions that come up. So looking at the black bar below, you should see the chat box icon. If you give that a click, the chat box will appear and you'll be able to pop any comments here. So you'll see that the little two bubble in blue is able to be changed. We recommend keeping that set to all panelists and attendees so we can all engage in the dialogue together. For questions that come up, we have our Q&A tab. So please click the Q&A button below and you'll see our Q&A box appear. Throughout the session, as questions come up for you, please type away, ask away in this Q&A space. We have left time at the end of our session to move through the questions that are asked. So despite that, we highly recommend answering questions, asking questions as they come up for you throughout today's session. Given the volume of questions and time we might have left remaining, we regrettably may not be able to get to every question asked, but do know we will be giving them a read, and if possible, we'll connect with you after the session to get your questions answered. So with that, we are set to begin. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to everyone to this very fascinating panel on the resurgence of extremism, of course, in the region. The first thing we do traditionally is we acknowledge at Raw Roads, we acknowledge that we live, learn, and work on the traditional lands of the Esquimalt and the Songhees families, and we're very grateful for that, and very grateful to acknowledge the indigenous population here in BC. So debt of gratitude as always to our indigenous members of the family. So today we're going to be looking at the resurgence of extremism and de-radicalization in post-ISIS Syria. And we're also going to be looking at the current challenges and the launch of the Rojava Information Centre report on de-radicalization. And we have some wonderful panelists in different parts of the world, of course, coming in from Rojava itself. And so we have five panelists. My name is Professor Kenneth Christie. I'm the program head for the Human Security and Peacebuilding program at Royal Roads University. And I've actually been doing quite a lot of collaboration with Mr. Haval Ahmad, who is associate faculty now here at Royal Roads. And we've been doing quite a bit. This is the second of three in these webinars, and we're hoping to have the third one in the new year. So I am basically going to let you know the names of the panelists. Our panelists are Mr. Saleh Muslim, Dr. Anne Speckhard, Mr. Haval Ahmad, and Mr. Thomas McClure. What we're going to do at the moment is introduce these panelists one by one. And the first panelist we have is Dr. Anne Speckhard. I just wanted to check that we have you. We have you there, Dr. Speckhard. Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. So let me just say a few things about Dr. Speckhard. Dr. Speckhard is the director of the International Centre for the Study of Violent Extremism, the ICSVE, and serves as an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University. She has interviewed over 700 terrorists, their family members, and supporters in various parts of the world, including in Western Europe, the Balkans, Central Asia, the former Soviet Union, and the Middle East. She is a highly sought-after counter-terrorism expert and has consulted to NATO, OSCE, the European Union Commission, and the European Union Parliament, and European and other foreign governments, and also to the United States Senate and House, Departments of State, Defense, Justice, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, CIA, and the FBI. So as you can see, Dr. Speckard is one of the more senior experts in this field, and we're very, very happy to have her here today. And if you would just like to maybe give us your thoughts, Dr. Speckard, on the topic and how we can address this. And I know you've had some discussion with Haval, but please, please, if you would like to give your presentation now.
Sure. Can you tell me how long should I take?
Got about 15 minutes, if that's okay.
Sure, sure. Okay. Well, as was said, I've been interviewing terrorists for years now, for about 20 years. And in the last 5 years, we stood up our center, the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. And in partnership with State Department, I started interviewing or trying to interview people that had been part of ISIS. And the reason for doing that, well, I was already studying terrorists as a researcher, but we started doing the interviews with video. So in the past, I was, your typical psychologist doing handwritten notes. I didn't even go in with a computer, and I never used a tape recorder because I didn't want to get people scared. But with State Department, we decided ISIS had become so prolific on the internet. At that time, they were on Twitter, they were on Facebook, they were on YouTube, and they were pulling people in from all over. As we know, there's over 40,000 that went to Syria from over 100 countries. And the question was, could we videotape people that had been inside of ISIS to speak against it? And State Department was happy for me to use anybody that had been in terrorism, but I felt it really needed to be ISIS. And I didn't know if I could interview people that had been part of ISIS, because as you know, terrorism studies has changed quite dramatically with more social media. Terrorists don't need journalists and they don't need researchers anymore to come and perhaps help them to get out their messages. In fact, journalists are useful to terrorists to kill and to do things like what they did with James Foley to get a lot of media attention because they're killing you instead of telling you about themselves. And it's a little bit different with researchers than journalists. But so I started out with trepidation, didn't know if I could get in or not. And we first started studying ISIS defectors that had fled from Syria and run into Turkey. So we interviewed about 32 that way. Then I started working with Iraqi authorities and started interviewing inside prisons in Iraq. And that's an interesting phenomena because a lot of these people have been tortured and they're facing death sentences. So they're in a pretty dire situation. But over time, I started working with the SDF and I really value this partnership. It's been amazing, and I have nothing but admiration for the SDF and the Autonomous Administration. And so all in all, and I also traveled around the world to different parts of Europe, talked to people that had returned from ISIS, to the Balkans, to Central Asia. And our sample is now 257 in-depth psychological interviews, almost all of them on videotape. A few times people have refused to be videoed. And at the end of the interview, well, in the beginning and the end, I ask a number of questions. And one is, if you're willing to speak against ISIS, if you no longer like ISIS, could I make a short video from what we've talked about? And I'm looking at, were they disillusioned with ISIS? So my interview goes something like this. Who were you before you even heard of ISIS? How did you grow up? What was your family circumstances? What was your religious beliefs? did you know anything about Syria? Or if you're a Syrian, how was it for you? If you're Iraqi, how was it for you? And when did you first hear about events in Syria, about the conflicts? How did it affect you? How did you first hear about ISIS? And how did you get pulled into this group? And then what were your experiences in the group? What was your onboarding? If you're a man, you usually went to Sharia training and weapons training. If you're a woman, you usually went into a madafa. And then your husband either came and picked you up, or you agreed to marry someone, or maybe a family member came to pick you up. And a lot of people said that at first they liked ISIS and they felt comfortable. They liked Syria. I like Syria too, so I can relate to that. The good weather, the good food, the good people. But over time, they started to see what they had really joined and how corrupt, un-Islamic, and brutal this organization was. And the men didn't expect to fight. Some of them totally expected to fight, but they didn't expect to fight other Muslims, or they wanted to fight the Assad regime and were quite surprised to be fighting Nusra or Free Syrian Army. So the interview goes on to what their experiences were, if they were arrested by ISIS, if they were tortured by ISIS, if they were mistreated, what their job was, what they did, if they mistreated people themselves, although I'm careful not to ask them too much about their crimes. And what I can say from interviewing all of these 257 ISIS members is there are certainly people that are still highly dedicated to ISIS among them. And they also speak about other people that are highly dedicated to ISIS. So for instance, the women in Al-Hol and Inisa, when it was operating, told about that there were groups of women that went around and were enforcing the ISIS rules. So if you took off your niqab, they would punish you. If you spoke to a journalist and it came out in the press, in Al-Hol and Inisa, they had phones, or they still have phones, so they can communicate with outsiders. And this is true for old Roj, not new Roj, but true for old Roj, that they have phones. So one woman told me she showed up for an interview and I had just seen her. She had spoken to the Russian channel, and she had blonde hair. She was from Belgium. And I said, I'm so surprised to see you in a hijab today, because you were on the news yesterday with this blonde hair, and why are you wearing hijab? And I don't care whether she wears hijab or not, I was just curious. And she said they came to me with knives and threatened me. So what women told me over and over again is these enforcers have phones. If anybody talks to the media, the people back in the country where the media plays call into them, through channels and say, punish her. So the women get their possessions stolen. This is a minimum punishment, get rocks thrown into their tents. And Lisa Smith, for instance, told me that her baby was almost killed by a rock that came right close to her face. They will find kerosene in their tent, a bottle of kerosene with the message of, keep it up, we'll burn your tent. And then there's women that have been stabbed, killed, and beaten. Not in that order, sorry. And the men say similar things. And they're also afraid of ISIS people that are still out at loose. So one woman in Al-Hol told me, a German woman, I want nothing to do with this organization anymore. I'm done with it. But the ISIS women are going around saying that Baghdadi gave a speech and that the brothers are going to break us out and bring us back to Raqqa. Is that true? Because the last place I want to go back is back to ISIS and back to Raqqa. And I told her I didn't think it was true, but that was before the Turks had, I told her absolutely it would never happen. But that was before the Turks invaded a year ago. And we saw the destabilization that happened when the Turks and the Turkish-backed rebels mortared the prison in Derek, when the women escaped from Inisa, and that camp was ultimately disbanded. And the many destabilizations that have happened. I have to say, our sheikh, we have a religious sheikh that works with us, commented when Turkey was attacking and ISIS people were escaping from the camps, it seems like Erdogan got his orders from Baghdadi, and he's following the incitement of Baghdadi. because Baghdadi had incited for the brothers to break the prisoners out. And, he was joking, but it's not really a joke. It's quite serious. And so what I would say is, in the majority of people that I've interviewed, and keep in mind that if someone's highly dedicated to ISIS, they may decide that they just won't even speak to me, and then that's not counted as an interview. But the majority of them, particularly the people from Europe, are exhausted of ISIS. They're tired. They feel like they were tricked. They feel like they were victims of ISIS. They're not taking total responsibility for the things they did to victimize other people, particularly Syrians. Although many of them say, I came to Syria because I wanted to save the Syrian people. And I realized instead we just victimized the Syrian people, and we didn't do good for them at all. But these people want to go back to their countries. And at the end of the interview, I ask everyone, do you want me to share your details with your justice ministry? And do you want to go back home? And you understand that this would be used for your prosecution. You'll probably end up in prison and hopefully go through some kind of rehabilitation program. And across the board, the Europeans say, I want to go home. I'm done with this organization. I would never pick up a gun again in favor of it or any other organization. I would see them as liars. Islamist organization that wants to establish a caliphate. I now realize how foolish that is. When I was in Europe, I was aiming to go to a utopia. I thought it would be a wonderful place. I thought I could practice my Islam. I thought I would have a good salary. I thought I would live wonderfully. And instead I went to a war zone. I took part in things I'm not proud of. And I just want to forget this organization. And I never want my children to grow up and know anything about it. And that statement is pretty much set across the board. And I would say also, there's examples where people tell me about being horribly tortured by ISIS, raped by ISIS. A number of the women that their countries are refusing to take them home out of fear of them were raped in ISIS prison. And, do you think they're ever going to go back to this organization? One Belgian woman that was very pregnant at the time that I interviewed her, and I was worried that she would have an unsafe childbirth because she had had a cesarean before. She told me about her father being shot in front of her by ISIS, of being shot in the back while she was holding her baby when they were trying to escape, of being put in prison, of all of them being tortured. Do you think she's ever going to go back to ISIS? And I'm not saying these people are innocent. I'm not saying that they shouldn't go to prison. I'm just saying that we are seeing a high level of de-radicalization. And then we also have to keep in mind that a lot of the foreigners traveled because they wanted to help Syrians. They went early on believing that they would fight against Assad. And then when the FSA and some of the other groups started hunting them down, they went over to ISIS without being ideologically indoctrinated or aligned with ISIS. And they got stuck inside of ISIS. Some of them did horrible things on behalf of ISIS. But that wasn't their primary reason for going to Syria. They went because they had been watching videos of Syrian people calling out to Muslims all over the world saying, please come and help us. And these were young men that were idealistic, confused about why countries like my own weren't doing much, and felt that they needed to take it into their own hands. But there were also people that went ideologically convinced, although many of them, once inside ISIS, got so disgusted and really started to question this ideology. So what I can tell you is that we're seeing a high number of what I call spontaneous de-radicalization. And the best way to explain that is what a woman herself said in Al Hol. She said, I didn't need a de-radicalization program. ISIS was a de-radicalization program. And just watching the horrible things they did and being forced to be part of it, because once they were in, it was very hard to leave, particularly for women, that it completely de-radicalized her. The other thing is I see that the prisoners talk to each other and, they're crowded in rooms together. I'm talking about the male prisoners now. And they go over the horrible things that ISIS did to each of them. So then it adds up. It's like, they're running their own de-radicalization program in some manner. But if we look on the outside, certainly ISIS is reorganizing itself, and they have support from different countries, which is concerning. And with the sectarian divide that continues in Iraq, it's very concerning that we'll see ISIS back again. I don't think that they will ever be able to establish a caliphate like they once did, because I would hope big militaries like the American military would just squash that immediately. But I really hope that we stay strong allies with the SDF. I hope that we continue to support the autonomous administration. I love to see a feminist oriented government in the heart of the Middle East. I love to see the grassroots democracy. And I love to see that the prisoners tell me there's very few prisoners that have complained about mistreatment. They complain about overcrowding, they complain about disease, about food. Those are normal things to complain. But I don't see marks of torture on them. I don't see them afraid of the soldiers that bring them into the room when I interview them. And I hear from almost everyone that torture is not something that's engaged in. And that is really cool. When you think of all the horrible things that ISIS did in the SDF territory, and that the ISIS prisoners are treated basically by Western standards. And I can't say my own country has done that well in that regard. But anyway, that's maybe a good place to stop. And I'm happy to engage in the discussion as we go on.
Well, thanks so much, Anne, for that very clear and articulate presentation. And I'm really learning a lot. I mean, you can't get this kind of research from just reading books and articles. What you're doing is absolutely groundbreaking, interviewing these ISIS terrorists, and we will have a lot of room for it in the discussion. We're going to move on to our second panelist now, who is Mr. Salih Muslim. Mr. Muslim is a familiar Kurdish political figure in the politics of Northeast Syria, and he was one of the founders of the Democratic Union Party, the PYD, in 2003. He's a member of the co-presidency council of the party, and Mr. Muslim is a frequent presence in European political institutions and has been invited and hosted by a number of officials in the European Union, including addressing the European Parliament. So welcome, Mr. Muslim. I know this is your second webinar, so I'm going to let you speak. And again, thank you very much for joining us all the way from Rojava.
Well, hello to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank all the team which give us this opportunity to talk to you, to be in this webinar. And of course, I mean, it's a very good thing, I mean, to introduce ourselves and what we are doing and the situation in Rojava. So let me brief what we mean by the terrorism. I mean, as Mrs. Anne said, we have two parts of this kind of terrorism. First of all, ideological terrorism, which some people are believed that they are doing something and following it. And some of them, they were cheated, and maybe they are victims of the black propaganda to join such an organization. Mostly, I will talk about this ideological thing of the terrorism, what they are doing. I mean, well, the terrorism is not for today. Maybe we can find such a thing, an ideological thing, maybe since at least, I mean, 1,400 years ago, when they were just believe in killing the people and going to the countries and slaughtering the people just to be close to the God and to go to the heaven. So this was the reason for that. Ideologically, so it's a long approach for them. I mean, for this kind of ideas, extremism and jihadism. But they were in the cave for a long time, maybe for hundreds of years. They were in the caves. Nobody was taking care of them, and they were not able to do, maybe from time to time, till they were used by the this kind of thinking, or this kind of ideological thing came, or let's say the religion, it became a tool of the politics. When the politicians used to use the, or prefer to use the religion as a tool for their expansionism and for some other things for their own interest at that time. So they just took this kind of ideological from the caves, and they give them the weapons and give them the resources and just send them to anywhere, which they are doing. So in the Middle East, we can see, I mean, this kind of ideological things and terrorism used by many sides, which they can benefit. I mean, maybe they are not able to do it in a legal way, or they don't have enough force to do it, or because of just the rules and the laws, international laws and so on. They just prefer to do it in such a terrorism ways. So, of course, I mean, we are here in Rojava as the Kurds were victims of such terrorism, because maybe in many different names, when the Syrian conflict started and we liberated our areas, we were attacked by those terrorist groups. I mean, by different names and different views, different clauses, and so like Jabhatul Nusra, like Rashidin, Muslim Brotherhoods, and recently was Daesh, I mean ISIS, which was, so we believe, I mean, somebody that just took those from their caves from since maybe thousands of years, and just brought them today and give them the weapons and train them, open the doors for them and even the camps for them for training, and they use them and to send them everywhere. I mean, we believe somebody wanted to create such an organization, terrorist organizations, just for their political aims to finish the Kurds, using them in Shankal and then in Kobani and other ways, and they are still using them. Mainly now, even in 2 days, they have, I mean, giving them all the, I mean, opportunities to live and to go to come, and even training in different ways in some ways. And they are sending them, I mean, using them in different areas, like sending them into Libya, to Nagorno-Karabakh, to some other places, and even to Europe. So, I mean, if you have such a power in your hand, which is illegal, and you are keeping yourself, I mean, even maybe a little bit away, I mean, distance between you and them, and we are using them in good manner, telling everybody that you are fighting against them, just to show them, I mean, show them that you are fighting against them, and using them from the other side by blackmailing the others, Europe's and so. So this is what our neighbors are doing actually. And now we are still facing them. We are facing them in these occupied areas, just like Afrin, Tel Abyad, Ras Al Ain. They have, maybe they are not under the name of ISIS, but they are in different names. You can see them, I mean, Syrian National Army, or in Jabhatul Nusra, or whatever they are, I mean, Sultan Murad, and many names and many organizations. All of them are the same ideas. So still somebody is using them and sending them to everywhere they like, exporting them to other countries for their interest, to use them for their own goals, political goals in everywhere, even to threat European countries also. So I think if we want really to make a solution for that, or to find a way to get rid of them, or at least to do what we can to reduce them again to their caves as they were before, we should try to prohibit these forces or these sides getting them and supplying them with the opportunities and the resources and even the weapons and training camps, not to use them. So we should be able to stop those people are using such organizations and such ideological to use the religion as a tool for the politics. So yeah, otherwise we will still, I mean, be in this conflict, and they will do it, I mean, by different names and different things in everywhere. Recently, we heard that some people are being trained to be sent to Kashmir, between Afghanistan and India. So this, I mean, Pakistan and India also. So this is a really problem for everybody, and you have to stop those sides or countries or whatever they are using such a power, I mean, as a tool in their hand for their interest or for their political goals. The actual situation now in Rojava, as Suzanne just mentioned, we have two kinds of them. We have about the camps which contain the fighters of ISIS, which there are about 12,000 people, fighters. So they are in the prison, they are not in the camps. And we have more than 2,000 of them. They are not Syrians and not Iraqis, so they are not local, maybe from different countries, about 40 countries. And we have Al-Hol camp, which was visited by, I think, Anne, and so maybe she was there and interviewed them. What we are doing, I mean, we are just trying, I mean, to contact the countries which they are their citizens, I mean, to take them, because the children and women, maybe most of them, as Mrs. Anne mentioned also, they were cheated by the organization, just by propaganda, by different ways and different impression that they are going to fight against Assad, and they just came here, they fought against the Kurdish people instead, or they fought some others, I mean, the innocent the Syrians, just because of they were cheated by the organizers or the people that are using them. So those, they are not guilty and they don't have too much to do. They should be sent to their countries. They should, even for the children, I mean, we have now thousands of those children, which is the new generation. If we leave them with the mothers in such camps like Al-Hol, and so they will be radicalized, and maybe we will have the second generation of those, I mean, ISIS people. So I think everybody should work to take them to the right place, to have their schools, to have been taught, and they should be very, I mean, to teach them carefully, not to return and not to allow them in the hands of such organizations, I mean, in the camps and so on. But nobody is taking care and nobody wants to get them back, just because maybe because of the political decision or political reasons. They are not, maybe they don't want to know this, the democratic administration northeast of Syria. They don't want to talk to them. Because of that, we still have, I mean, thousands of those women and children in the camp. We would like to get them back to their countries, but many countries, they don't want to get them back. So this is the problem, really. And just because they say, well, you are not recognized, they want to do it through the Syrian regime, but Syrian regime, they don't want to deal with us, I mean, because we have in our area, we have the administration, we were victims of these organizations, we fought against them, we liberated our areas in the hand of ISIS, so we should be the people you can talk to. They don't allow them, they don't want to talk to us because, well, they say you are not legal, is a problem of legitimacy. They're trying to do it in some by some ways, some different ways, which is not accepted by us. They want to do it through Turkey. Turkey is fighting against us, and the Syrian regime also fighting against us. All they can do, they can just contact the administration to get them back, and we will be very helpful. Most of them, they have got those such children and women, even thousands of them, I mean, by Russian and some other countries, and even Sudanese, and maybe Sweden, and also the Finlandians, and so the Swedish people, they got some of them. But they were able, I mean, to contact the administration and get them back. But for the fighters, it's a different case because they are guilty and they have killed our people and they were fighting, and it's very dangerous. So we would like to have a tribunal for them. There should be tribal trailed here, I mean, in Syria, because we have evidences, we have witnesses, we have everything, and their crimes is in Syria. So it's a different case. We are trying, I mean, the administration, they have contacted everybody, European countries and United Nations and so, telling them, but nobody is taking care of it. Till now, I mean, still it's just staying like that. And maybe from time to time, even we have some insurgencies between them. They are trying to get out. There is a problem, really. We are, I mean, in difficult situation even with them, just because guarding them, supplying them for everything. I mean, and even the guarding itself is a problem to have about 10,000 people, fighters in many places, and protect them and so. For example, the recent Turkish attacks, they were trying to reach to this one to free them, to use them, to take them back to Turkey. And they got in Isa, they got about many families, maybe more than 100 families, and they send them back to some other countries, and maybe there were some ISIS members. They were not fighters, but they were among the ISIS, and they use them. And now maybe those families are, many of them are located in Tel Aviv and in Ras Al Ain also. So Turkey is using them, and we have to be very careful of that. They have training camps, and I mean, just remember, I mean, even the Khalifa, which was Baghdadi, was killed in the border of Turkey. I mean, he was in the hug of Turkey in Erdogan. And still, I mean, now, many of them, they escaped from our areas during the conflict, during the fighting. They were able to escape from some places from the camps, and they went to Turkey. They just, I mean, changed their clothes, and they are fighting against us now under the name of Syrian National Army or some other different names. And some of them, they were sent to Karabakh. Some of them, they were sent to Libya. And we have, I mean, if somebody wants to know, that we have the names of them. All the names are available, and they were emirs among Daesh and some other places, I mean, because they were fighting against us, and then they escaped to Turkey, and now they have support from Turkey to be used in many other areas. So what we can do, I mean, for this radicalization, and just to get rid of such organization, we have to stop the sides using such a thing. From our side, we are doing what we can do. We outfought against them, and now we are trying to, I mean, especially for the background of the society, and so we are teaching them, we are telling them that it's not right, and this kind of ideological, we are talking, I mean, even showing practically what's the benefits of the democracy and democratic relations, and living together instead of killing and so on. Maybe we are organizing a daily, maybe tens of these lectures and I mean conferences for the civilians, for our peoples, which we can reach, especially among the Arab society, Arab components, I mean, in Deir ez-Zor, in Raqqa, telling them that, I mean, what is the democracy living together and the values of the democracy. We are trying to tell them to change their mentality. Otherwise, the short way is just to keep the other sides, I mean, using them from out, and then for long term, try to affect them and to change their mind to be with a modern ideological, or let's say democratic measurements and values, trying to just rescue them from this ideological extremism. This is the only way I think we can do. Well, shortly, this is what can I say, and of course, I will be glad to receive questions to answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muslim, and again another terrific presentation. It's always great to have that very local perspective and that kind of broad international perspective also that you provide and placing these things in context. So it's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for your presentation. Could I just remind everyone who's participating that if you would like to ask a question, please put it in the question and answer box. There's quite a lot of questions coming up in the other boxes, and I think if we could have it more in the question and answer chat box, that would be great. Thanks. So our next presenter today is Mr. Haval Ahmad. He is associate faculty at Royal Roads University in the Human Security and Peacebuilding program. And he's also a doctoral candidate in international politics at Aberystwyth University. And Haval is specializing in de-radicalization, especially de-radicalization amongst youth. Having seen quite a lot of his research, I think he's doing really groundbreaking research in this area, and very happy to know Haval and to welcome him to the webinar today. He's did a lot to organize this as well, I should mention, which is terrific, and he will also be working on the third webinar quite shortly in the new year. But welcome, Haval, and love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Christie, for the introduction, and just also want to say thank you to the co-panelists for taking the time to share their expertise and perspective with us, and all the attendees for being with us this morning here in Canada and the United States, and this evening in Europe and the Middle East. Before I start with the discussion, I would like to give you, especially those who are not familiar with the topic or the region, a perspective in numbers, so you have an idea when we talk about the risk or potential risks. Al-Hol camp is the largest camp in Rojava in northeast Syria, and at its highest peak, it housed over 70,000 people, mostly ISIS affiliates or ISIS families who were fleeing ISIS' last stronghold in Baghouz. In this camp, which is administrated by the Kurds and the SDF, there are just over 40,000 minors under the age of 18. And out of those 40,000, there are 6,987 foreign minors, which means they're not Syrian, they're not Iraqis, rather foreign nationals or born to foreign nationals, including European and North Canadian and Southeast Asian and Americans as well. So in this webinar, I'll be examining and discussing what we can call a preventable disaster if the international community, key regional players, and intergovernmental organizations don't start acting now. And by acting now, we're talking about today, not next year or next decade. While it's a bit late at this point, but with the right efforts and with the right approach and with the right systematic process that can be internationally sponsored, there's a chance to avoid this disaster, which will not only have an impact on the Kurds or on Syria or Iraq or the Middle East, but it will have a global impact that reaches Europe and North America as well. The disaster is in the making, and it's the transformation of today's children and youth in Al-Hol camp into tomorrow's terrorists. And here I'm pleading for action on two grounds. The first ground is security and counterterrorism ground. And the second is human security and universal child rights ground. In relation to the first ground, and that is security and counterterrorism, I conducted many research interviews with individuals in Northeast Syria and Iraq. And based on these interviews and other data from the field, I can say with confidence that an immediate response to the issue of children and youth radicalization in the camps in Northeast Syria is by far the most logical and best proactive counterterrorism approach that states can adopt in fighting tomorrow's terrorists. That's simply because this population today is identified, confined in a specific geographical area, and they are under the control of local authorities and the international coalition and the American specifically. And many of them want to reform, as Dr. Ann mentioned earlier. Many of them want to reform, but out of fear for the hardcore radical extremist women in the camp, they simply cannot, because if they're being seen talking to NGO workers or journalists, they will be deemed defectors, and therefore they will be punished. And many of these crimes have been committed in the camp, where individuals have been killed and their tents burned for attempting to break away from ISIS. So we have a chance to de-radicalize thousands of ISIS affiliates today, where we know where they are and where we have a direct access to them, and it's even more cost effective financially and kinetically. So why not act proactively? If we leave it to the unpredictable tomorrow or next year, where we no longer have the privilege of having them in one or two camps, and we're not having the privilege of having them under control, and when they get help from the outside to organize a major breakout, as discussed by Mr. Muslim earlier, where there have been attempts, it will cost governments more resources and cost more lives for sure. So why not proactive, but instead wait for a disaster to happen and act then? This question should be looked into very delicately, because with all I'm thinking here, with all the greatness of NATO and with all the resources and technology of the US Army and the sophisticated Western intelligence agencies' capacities and international coalition, we have not been able to defeat terrorism nor reduce it. In fact, it's rising. And the reemergence is getting stronger and stronger and significantly bigger, as seen with ISIS. So we might have ended terrorism here and there militarily, but terrorism is not only the numbers we're looking at, the numbers we're fighting, but rather it's the ideology that's being passed on to others and the other generations. So kinetic counterterrorism is extremely important as a form of, or as a form of counterterrorism, but it remains limited if de-radicalization efforts for younger generations do not follow. As for the second ground, and that is human security and universal child rights ground, an intervention in the form of an internationally recognized framework to de-radicalize and rehabilitate children and youth in Al-Hol camp is driven by principles from the United Nations Conventions, from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The same institution which has developed the convention, but has not yet set a framework to protect these rights under these circumstances. And here I'm talking about the UN and the signatory states to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Before I proceed any further with this point, I want to emphasize that explicitly talking about radicalized children and youth in the camp, not the adults. My argument doesn't include adult ISIS affiliates, so please make no mistakes thinking I'm advocating for ISIS affiliates. So going back to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, those children and youth in the camp are not only under the age of consent, but also developmentally vulnerable, which requires us to pause and consider our obligations toward this specific population. Those children born to ISIS members, especially those are under the age of 12, did not choose to become ISIS. They did not choose to be the next jihadis. They did not choose to be there. They don't know even they have internationally recognized rights under the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child. However, we know that. What they know is that they are turning into and becoming tools for the next mission, as taught by their radical extremist mothers in the camp, the specific group Dr. Spicard talked about earlier. We also know that by knowing that there is a process of radicalization of children and youth in camps, and allowing that to happen under our watch is a violation of the child's rights under the convention. The convention, the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, clearly states that leaders need to act to protect the rights of the children, and those rights include Article 6 of the convention, which reads, child has an inherited right to life. However, with minimal resources in Northeast Syria and external support, limited external support offered to the self-administration in Northeast Syria, reports suggest that there are many infants die due to malnutrition and other diseases and many other causes. Article 7 reads, the child should be registered immediately after birth and shall have the right from birth to a name, the right to acquire a nationality, and the right to know and be cared for. That's from Article 7 of the Charter. None of these children are officially registered in their home countries or properly registered with agencies to receive services. There are no identification cards for many reasons, including the refusal of their hardcore extremist mothers and due to lack of a long-term plan. Moreover, on this, subsection 2 of Article 8 of the Convention reads, where a child is illegally deprived of some or all of the elements of his or her identity, state parties should provide appropriate assistance and protection with a view to reestablishing speedily his or her identity. And to that, very few countries have followed through with this principle. And I'm proud to say that Canada is one of the very few countries, as recently seen in the repatriation of the Canadian orphan from Al Hol camp, where both of her parents were killed while fighting or serving with ISIS. So there's no question that every single state around the globe would worry or should worry about repatriating ISIS affiliates from Al Hol camp or Roche camp and detention centers in Northeast Syria back to their home countries. Whether that's Canada, the US, United Kingdom, France, Sweden, Finland, or even local communities in Iraq, they all have legitimate fears, especially in the West where there's no legal mechanism to try these individuals in the absence of evidence. As you all know, all these crimes were committed in Syria and Iraq, and all ISIS affiliates somehow claimed they were cooks. Nobody was fighting apparently. So you can imagine that the difficulties in proving charges, and therefore they will be set free in society where law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies will be wasting tons of resources on monitoring for quite some time until he or she, until the individual relapses again and commit an act of terror or radicalize and recruit others. This fear is legitimate, and I do not blame governments for not repatriating or being slow in the repatriation process. But what is the solution then? While our fear is legitimate, there should be a separation between children and adult ISIS affiliates, simply because of the child's developmental ability is more prone to rehabilitate and de-radicalize compared to the adults. There's a hope in de-radicalizing and rehabilitating children. This step is even more critical because by doing so, we will be preventing a guaranteed future disaster in a form of a global terrorism. And this brings me to the application of Article 9 of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, which reads, state parties shall ensure that a child shall not be separated from his or her parents against the will, except when competent authorities subject to judicial review determine, in accordance with the applicable law and procedures, that such separation is necessary for the best interest of the child. Some might oppose this approach, but if we are implementing these applications in our societies and communities when a child is abused, why can't we do that with those children in camps in Northeast Syria? Of course, within an international framework guided by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This can give a chance to de-radicalize and rehabilitate these children while other groups are working on the de-radicalization of women in camps, and while governments find a solution or establish an international tribunal. Just to clarify, I'm not implying that we should take the children away from their mothers indefinitely. No, my research findings suggest that by building a framework that includes both the mothers and children in two separate programs has the potential, because at least the children will not be subjected to 24/7 indoctrination and radicalization, a process which has been or has become the norm for these children in these camps. If you're wondering about, or if you're wondering what the impact has been on these children in terms of indoctrination, and want to imagine the potential threat, I'll show you a short video. I'll share my screen in a second, which will explain what children are exposed to in camps in
Haval, you seem to be frozen. Are you showing the video?
من وضعية وما نحوها، فإنما هم يغرونكم بما يأتيهم من دعم من المؤسسات الدولية وغيرها. وأما بالنسبة إلى أوضاع المخيم فإنه يخبركم يا من في الخارج بأنه في أسوأ حال من الأحوال، ومنها حال الأشبال الذين كانوا قابضين على دينهم كالقابض على الجنب، وأما الآن قد أصبح بعض منهم من أقرب المقربين إليهم، وبدأوا يلعبون بالمنكرات والمعاصي كالطفل الذي يلعب بالكرة. هنالك الكثير من الأخطاء التي يتداولونها الكثير في سكان المخيم، فلا يغرنكم موقف يخرجه الإعلاميون من أسرار الحسنة المبينة، فإنهم لا يتفوهون بكلمة أو بجملة إلا أن تكون لصالحهم. الرجاء تساعدوا أخواتكم وإخوانكم في مخيمهم فيما هو خير لكم ولهم، وجزاكم الله.
So this is something that children are, despite the fact this message is addressed to the ISIS supporter from outside of the camp and call and pleading for help to help them break out of the camp. But as you can see, one of the major complaints, I mean, I put it in the bullet points, was actually children have become soft in the camp because camp officials are making them play soccer. And it's the biggest sin for them, apparently. So therefore, children are being deprived from their simplest rights here. I'll show you another video, and it's one of the scenes that children are seen on a daily basis in the camp. And make no mistake, this is in recent days, this is in post-ISIS. So just a few seconds of the video basically to give you a perspective on what's happening in these camps and why it's extremely dangerous for these children to be in these camps under these circumstances where ISIS ideology and the radical extremist ideology is 24/7 communicated and expressed in the camp, and those children are being exposed to that. To give you another perspective, and I invite you to look at the two following pictures which were sent to me from within the camp. And as for the videos, those were from confiscated cell phones and the confiscation were conducted by security forces in the camp. The following two photos, which I'm going to show, would give you an idea in terms of what children in the camp are subjected to. I'll give you a few seconds to look at them. So in the left one, you could see, a child being tied from his leg to prevent him from going outside and play, commit sins like playing soccer in the camp. Therefore, he should be radicalized instead and punished. Where the child on the right, you can see from the toque he's wearing the toque is ISIS implement or ISIS flag on the toque. And stop sharing. Okay. So I want to leave you with toward the end, or actually not going back with the point here. The other child is tied from the leg at the first child we'll look at. And as mentioned, it's done for the purpose of preventing children from being children in the camp and be part of ISIS plan to be radicalized on a daily basis. And within their calls for the unifiers, as they put it, in reference to ISIS supporters outside of the camp, to rescue them, there's always a hope that they will break out and they will free these children, and those children will become the next terrorists. So you can imagine. Lastly, I want to leave you with a drawing by one of the children in the camp who has been clearly raised by an extremist mother. The drawing was sent to me from within the camp, and it shows that these women in the whole camp are not wasting a single minute to raise tomorrow's terrorists. Even by means like art like the one which I'm going to show you in a second, if I can share my screen. This is a piece of art by one of the children in the camp. And again, it was confiscated by the security forces in the camp. And this is the type of art, the only art children are exposed to by their extremist mothers in the camp. And again, here I want to separate between the two groups of women. As Anne mentioned earlier, there are a group of women who want to reform and get out of the camp. They want to do nothing with ISIS anymore, take the children away. But because of the fear imposed on them by the extremist women, they are able to do that. So this explains what children are being exposed to, what they're being taught within the camp. The longer we keep children and youth in these camps without a well-structured, internationally sponsored de-radicalization and rehabilitation framework, I strongly believe by 2030, the world will be dealing with the largest wave of jihadis, simply because today's children in these camps have lost their fathers, their brothers, their mothers, or the so-called caliphate. And these women in the camps are teaching them that it was the West, it was the Shia, it was the moderate Arab Sunnis, it was the Kurds, it was the West, it was everyone else who wasn't part of ISIS, who killed their relatives, their fathers, their mothers, their destroyed their caliphate. So growing up with that much hate and the right amount of indoctrination and de-radicalization, and coupled with isolation, of course, these women have formed the perfect recipe, or I call the perfect recipe, to create tomorrow's terrorists, or what they refer to as cops of the caliphate. That's my time, everyone. And if you have any question, please write them in the Q&A box and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Haval. Again, a very articulate presentation. I know you've done tremendous amount of research on this, so it's always great to hear the most recent thoughts. And we're going to move on to our next presenter, Mr. Thomas McClure. He's a researcher and spokesperson with the Rojava Information Centre, and he's also going to be talking about the launch of a new document that's come out detailing some of this. So, Thomas, we're very, very keen to hear what you have to say, and welcome to the panel. And if you could probably start now, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Good to meet you all. As Christie mentioned, then I'm speaking to you from Rojava Information Centre in North and East Syria. And for those of you that don't know, the Rojava Information Centre is a volunteer body based here that basically tries to build a bridge between Rojava, North and East Syria, and the outside world, and to communicate in many different ways about what's happening here. Obviously, as a part of that, we're always thinking and looking like what are the subjects where what's happening here is not being understood well. What are the subjects where there's a gap between the reality that we see every day on the ground and what is being said in the global press, and how can we correct that? How can we help out and help people to understand what's really happening here in this region, which it's kind of tough to get to and it's kind of tough to get information about. And that was like the main reason for this report of ours, which you can see on the screen, Hidden Battlefields. Because as I think Anne alluded to, there is sometimes this kind of narrative concerning the tens of thousands of ISIS detainees here in North and East Syria, that, you know, the Kurds are treating them badly, that they're keeping them in these camps and in these prisons, which are in very terrible circumstances. They're denying them their rights and they're not doing the right thing. And so this is going to help ISIS out, and the Kurds, as they say, are doing something wrong. That, I think, is not the reality that we see. Yeah, as Anne also said, there are huge problems in the camps and in the prisons. No one denies that, least of all the administration here, particularly humanitarian problems. But in terms of the approach, in terms of what the administration here wants to do, what they try to do, I think there is also a lot to be happy about. There's a lot that's very positive, a lot that, again, as Anne said, is quite a lot better than what Western states have done when they've had to deal with even a fraction of the number of radicalized terrorists that the administration here is having to deal with. And so the purpose of this report is to look at what is the administration doing. Haval talked a bit about kinetic de-radicalization programs that are needed. And this report is looking at what programs are there already here in North and East Syria, like in which ways are they trying to reach people and de-radicalize them, and what needs to be done, what more needs to be done, what kind of support does there need to be to move these programs on from maybe just kind of small positive projects to something bigger, to something more comprehensive or holistic. So yeah, what I will say today will kind of be in two main sections. Firstly, I will speak about some of these programs, these pilot programs, we can say, of de-radicalization. And then secondly, I will look a little bit more broadly at the overall policies of the administration and how these fit into programs of de-radicalization, of rehabilitation, as we would say, not just de-radicalizing individuals, but de-radicalizing whole regions. Yeah, so before I get into that, the other panelists have already given a good overview, but just to reiterate exactly what we're talking about here, we're talking about Whole Camp, which holds, as Haval said, around 10,000 foreign nationals and around 60,000 Syrian and Iraqi nationals. The foreigners, all of the women with some links to ISIS, most of them pretty radicalized. For the locals, about half-half. Some of them also committed followers of ISIS, some of them refugees who ran away from ISIS, and everything in between. Then in Roj Camp, we have another few thousand radicalized foreign women and their children, maybe less radicalized than the ones in Whole Camp. And in the prisons, we have around 2,000 male foreign national fighters, none of whom have yet been to trial. And we also have around maybe 13,000, 14,000 Syrian and Iraqi fighters. Half of them have been through the legal system. They've been tried. Some of them have been found innocent and released. Some have been given big sentences of up to 20 years. And most of them are serving somewhere in between that sort of 2 up to 20 years, depending on their offense. And then, of course, you have regions as a whole, regions like Deir ez-Zor particularly, but also Raqqa, Manbij, parts of Hasaka, where ISIS could recruit a lot, where ISIS was very strong, where ISIS had its bases. And when we talk about de-radicalization, we have to be thinking about these whole regions as well. And so, yeah, as I said, in terms of actual de-radicalization efforts, then there are a few concrete programs that are already underway in North and East Syria under the auspices of the Autonomous Administration, the governing body in this region. I won't have time here to go into detail in all of them, but just to mention some of these examples. Maybe the most famous example that some of you may be familiar with is the Huri Center, This maybe is one of the most positive examples. It's a centre home to now around 200, but it will be more, several hundreds in the near future, of the cubs of the caliphate. So specifically young boys aged under 18 who were trained by ISIS, who either fought with ISIS or were trained to fight with ISIS, were trained to be suicide bombers, were trained to conduct atrocities, were used in ISIS's propaganda. These kids that we've seen the images all over the world. And they've got them all living there together. And, on the one side, yes, it's a secure center. They can't just leave the place. They are detained. But the approach of staff is completely not, that of prison staff, that, they live there together with these boys, that they eat the same food as them, sleep in the same place as them, try to create a sort of an environment as much as possible without hierarchy and without pressure, to allow these boys just to live a bit, to study basic stuff, to have room to talk, room to express their feelings, to have room to play sport or to play music in ways that were forbidden to them under ISIS, and to open up a bit. And this kind of general approach that you see here in the Hori Center, you will also see in other programs across the region. So yeah, just to go through that a bit, for example, in both Hol Camp and in Roj Camp, you have outreach programs for women in particular, done by local women's organizations normally. And again, organizing with women, either like practical training, stuff like first aid, personal hygiene, or life skills such as sewing, for example, so they can get some employment, or discussions, showing a film or having a discussion about women's rights, for example, about gender-based violence, about child marriage, for example, multiple marriage, forced marriage, issues that might affect these women as women are living under ISIS. And this is something which is led by local women here. And these programs also are underway, are meeting with some success, particularly in Roj Camp, where the humanitarian situation is better, where there is a better ratio between the staff and the women, where the security is better, and where there's therefore more room to develop and to have these discussions. And then as well, you will also find in some of the prisons, for example, there's one prison for women who have been convicted of ISIS membership, so not the camps, but a prison for women. And there you have similar programs, outreach, education, discussion programs. And again, in at least one or two of the prisons holding male fighters, you have similar programs. So if we take all of these different programs, there's a few common points that we can highlight. One is this kind of gently approach, not of going in and telling people necessarily that they're wrong, but creating room for discussion, room for people to say how they feel, whether they themselves feel like they were victimized by ISIS, rightly or wrongly, and to allow them to define themselves in the conversation as they see fit. This is kind of a principle that we're seeing consistently applied, and which I think is really important. And this maybe feeds a bit into the other kind of common factor, is that these programs are normally being led by women. This is something which, as you all know, is a principle of the political movement here in every field, that women should take the leadership, and particularly when it's a women's issue. And so what this means here, of course, is that they can come and say, look, you're a Muslim woman, I'm a Muslim woman, like, let's talk about it, let's talk about what it feels like, let's talk about what like our experience was like with marriage, and so on, and find like a point of connection that is even deeper than this religious self-definition on the basis of womanhood. And this also, I think, is something very positive. Of course, the other thing that ties these projects together, they're too small. They're way too small. That, okay, you have maybe a few hundred kids in one place receiving this kind of closer attention. You have maybe 30, 40, 50 women at one time meeting together in Roj Camp or in Hol Camp. But at the same time, we're dealing with tens of thousands of people here. And so there has to be a kind of a bigger response. Others have already said that the Western powers have to do more in terms of providing the basic setting for these programs to be successful. And they also need skilled people. Like what you won't find, for example, is any trained psychologists, because there are very few in this region of any description. There's very few doctors, let alone psychologists, child psychologists, for example. So there's both funding but also expertise. People who are willing to come and work with these people is what is really sorely needed by the administration here. And of course, the administration also sees that these little programs themselves, while positive, are not enough to deal with this. And so then we come to the other part of what I want to talk about today. And that is, how is the administration trying to make bigger reforms to this region as a whole within its own borders, and even beyond that, what's it as a kind of vision for this region as a whole to prevent something like this happening again, a kind of broader de-radicalization. And on this point, there's kind of two strands of the administration's policy that I want to highlight. First of which is the kind of devolution, decentralization that it tries to follow, and linked to that is the question of justice reform. And so when we look at the administration's policy towards ISIS, like something which many of you will probably be aware of, is the decisions this year to put in place both a general amnesty for Syrian nationals living in whole camp, so pretty much all the Syrians living in whole camp who want to go home can go home, an amnesty. And secondly, they've also released quite a number of low-level ISIS prisoners and reduced the sentences of some others. And so to understand where this comes from, fundamentally, this is a question about decentralization and about regional autonomy. And why was this decision made is because the people in these regions we talked about, regions like Deir ez-Zor, like Raqqa, it's what they were asking for, something that they have been demanding from the administration for a year or two now. And the administration here is of the belief that decentralization, granting people from a certain community the right to determine what happens in that community, giving them ownership over their own future and their own region, is the best way to build democracy. It's the best way to avoid the circumstances which led to the development of the Assad regime or other authoritarian states in this region or elsewhere. And it's the best way to ensure a better future for this region. And so that is why, following these demands from people of Deir ez-Zor and the people of Raqqa in particular, to send these people home, the administration at the end has said, okay, yeah, let's do it that way. And it kind of seems counterintuitive in some sense, I think. Okay, so you've got all these ISIS people in one place, you've got them all there, why you would release these people. But I mean, I think the thing here is that somewhere like Whole Camp, as it is right now, it is the #1 radicalization hotspot on the face of the planet. If you want to radicalize a kid, send them to Whole Camp. That's the reality. It's apparent that the administration doesn't have the resources to do any kind of like big-scale de-radicalization program there. It's also apparent that the international community is not going to take that step. And so the administration said, okay, so what's the best thing we can do? We can meet these people's demands, we can send them back, and we can make as good a life as possible for them there in their home communities. And what they hope is that when they meet these communities halfway on this point, but also on other points, when they're saying, okay, we'll listen to you, what you want, then we will be able to understand one another. This resentment won't build, this resentment towards an upper class, which was such a factor in the rise of ISIS in both Iraq and Syria, this kind of ethnic resentment or religious resentment. We can try and get past that a bit by saying, okay, we respect you, you want to do things differently, do it your way, and we will support you. We will try and help you to put the humanitarian infrastructure and the basic infrastructure and the security infrastructure in place to achieve that. And that's why you were seeing these releases. It's also driven by the different approach to justice, which the administration has, which again, there's not really time to get into here, but in many ways, the administration is certainly trying to get away from violent retribution. It's even trying to get away a bit from the use of even going to court, and is trying to resolve things before it arrives to that stage through dialogue. That's why it's set up these reconciliation committees all over the region to solve problems, to solve tribal feuds and so on through dialogue and through, a kind of a spirit of forgiveness. And, these are high principles. I think with, for example, its recent announcement that it's going to, that it is releasing so many of these people, the administration has shown that it is willing to follow through on these principles. And what is then needed, in these regions, just as much as it is in the camps, is support. Know that the security situation and the humanitarian situation in particular needs to improve to create a kind of base level for people to go back, find that they can live well, find that unlike before, unlike under the regime, they can make their voice heard, find that, you know, like maybe this person is Kurdish and this person is Arab, but, you know, I respect you and you respect me, and this is the program. There are encouraging signs. For example, in Deir ez-Zor, we see that despite the quite large numbers of people that have been released in the past year from whole camp, I think it's now around 5,000 men, women, and children that have gone home. We haven't seen any rise in ISIS attacks. In fact, the numbers are going steadily down, 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 even as more people are going home. So I think that is something which is very positive. But at the same time, it's important not to have kind of rose-tinted spectacles about this. I think sometimes the administration does suffer from this as well. That, you know, the reality does remain that there will be tens of thousands of people being held in whole camp for the foreseeable future, that the situation in Deir ez-Zor remains extremely tough for the civilians that are living there. And so, yeah, there needs to be support from the international community for the future. And I think that would kind of be my message, is that people can look at our report, which is, I will put the link in the chat. It's also downloadable from Rojava Information Centre.com. And you can see these different programs and these different outreach measures, like, and people, you know, researchers, journalists should come and see, visit these programs, visit Deir ez-Zor, visit the Women's Council there, visit the Civil Council there, visit also something which I didn't talk about, the imams being trained by the administration to spread a new form of democratic Islam in these regions, to go into the mosques and work with people from this common basis and say to them, hey, let's practice a different kind of Islam and so on. These are, you know, hugely important efforts. It's a tough job, but I think the administration has proven it's the best partner in the region to do this job by a long way. It was the best partner to defeat ISIS. It sacrificed a lot of people and achieved that, and there's no reason why this administration, with its the best standards of human rights in the region, the best standards of democracy, the best standards of rule of law, can't lead this struggle on the hidden battlefield of terrorism as well, on the battlefield of ideology, that is. And so I'd just like to leave you with one kind of short story, one memento. So if you visit somewhere like Roj camp, for example, there's a young woman who is in charge of the camp. She's younger than me, very young indeed, maybe 21, 22. She's lost, I think, 2 brothers in the fight against ISIS that were both killed by ISIS, and yet the women of the camp all call her mother or sister. You know, I've walked around with her and I've seen the respect, the huge respect which she has for them, and so the respect which they give to her as well. And these are the kind of people that we need to be leading this struggle against ISIS's ideology. And if we can put the trust in these people, as we did on the military battlefield, I think there's no reason why this struggle against ISIS's ideology can't be a successful one as well, together with the autonomous administration. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Thomas, for again a really fascinating presentation. And what's been great about the presentations today is this perspective from people who are actually working in the field, to academics who are working on these issues of counterterrorism, de-radicalization, but also the amount of shared knowledge and the different perspectives to build up our information. And as you say, this the Rojava Information Centre has produced this document. I would encourage everyone to go into that and download it and get that information, because this is really incredibly valuable to what we're learning about today and how we understand things. So what I'd like to do now is go straight into the question and answer, if that's all right. We have quite a lot of questions, so and I'll direct them at the people involved. The first question we have is from Roland. He's asking, Dr. Speckard, how did you determine the ISIS claims of de-radicalization were credible and not simply opportunistic? So, Dr. Speckard, do you have some thoughts on that?
I see I was muted. In our research interviews, I always tell people, please don't admit crimes you haven't already admitted to the authorities. So I'm coming in as an interrogator and looking for their crimes for prosecution. I'm a researcher. But what I do listen for is, does their story sound like the other stories? I mean, at this point, there's 257 interviews. Does it sound credible? And do I hear this trajectory of some people were ideologically indoctrinated before they even came, before they joined. Some were ideologically indoctrinated in Sharia camp, and heavily so. And ISIS made a point of doing that with every man after the caliphate was pulled together. And then are there things that assault that ideological indoctrination or belief that ISIS was going to create some kind of utopia? So I'm looking for changes over time, but I'm definitely looking for, do they admit that at some point they liked ISIS? And some people, like the guy that was in the Beatles, Alexandra Coty, I mean, he just played around. And, you know, he explained some things, but I think it was a lot of lies. And, but when they lie, I just ignore it. And I just keep going on and asking them about other things and spend quite a long time with them. I spend as long as I'm able, and there's always some rush because the guards are getting tired when I stay all day. But try to do about an hour and a half, 2 hours with everybody. And what I hear is serious disillusionment with ISIS. I don't hear people taking responsibility for their own actions. Very rarely someone says, I know I was wrong, I know I hurt people, I know I need to make amends, and I take responsibility for what I did. What I do hear is a lot of victimization, a lot of ISIS lied to me, ISIS took advantage of me, ISIS tortured me, ISIS jailed me. And when they tell stories like that, I know that they're have moved away from their radicalization stance, because do you continue liking an organization that killed your family members or that tortured you or raped you? I doubt it. But certainly there's liars, and there's nothing I can do about them lying. I don't ask them about giving their information to their countries till the end of the interview for exactly that reason, that I don't want them to present a beautiful picture back to their country of how good they are. And I would say, I think a lot of people actually get quite honest. They sound genuine and honest, probably because I don't pursue them about talking about their crimes. And in fact, I stop them. Like, for instance, an ISIS Emni wanted to tell me about executing 17 of the ISIS members that he had executed, and he started talking about it. It was completely fascinating because they did an Islamic burial after they executed them, if you can imagine that. This was ISIS members, not local Syrians. And but I told him, stop, you're on film, and you're a kid. I don't want you to incriminate yourself this way.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much. I have another quick question for you, and I hope to share the questions amongst the other group, but these are the order that they're coming in. And the question is from Kadi Jatu. Would you say that this resurgence is a second wave that is related to states' reluctance to address root causes, or this additional issue of repatriation? Again, that's directed to you, Anne. It's actually mentioned you in the question. So.
I think many of the panelists could answer this question, but I'll just jump in and say, I don't think it has to do with repatriation. I think the ISIS resurgence has the goal of breaking down the walls. I mean, that's something that Al-Qaeda in Iraq did, that they broke into the prisons and released people and then made their fighting ranks even bigger. But the reasons that ISIS is strong is they're getting money from other countries, they're getting support from other countries. In Iraq, the sectarian divide and the justice issues have not been dealt with. And ISIS exists in the same numbers it did before it declared its caliphate. And these people are not being successfully rounded up. In some cases, they have local support. In other cases, they're doing horrendous things to the locals, so they're afraid to speak up to them. And when we see people in Europe or in Western countries responding to them, that has to do with the root causes as well. They're still very active on the internet. They're still calling for attacks. I don't think they're calling for travel as much as they're calling for support. They're asking to break the women out of al-Hol and to send money. So we've seen them on Instagram and Facebook asking to send money. I don't know how many of you saw the Netflix movie Mosul, but right after it came out, ISIS was able to create a branded movie glorifying what they did in Mosul, and they had the Netflix logo on it. You know, sometimes you have to a little bit laugh at their cleverness, but you know, they're still there. They're still talking to people, and they're talking to people that feel discriminated in their home countries and that don't understand what happened on the ground with ISIS and how horrible it was.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on to the next question from Muqtarib, who's asking, there seems to be an unspoken suspicion on the individuals who joined ISIS from Western European states. Regret, perhaps we also need to talk about why these individuals felt marginalized and after systematic both face-to-face and online propaganda joined such an atrocious terrorist group. And maybe Haval, you could answer this. Why do you think these individuals felt marginalized and joined these terrorist groups after online propaganda?
Sure, and I think can contribute to that as well. I think that's a very valid argument because, you know, with terrorism, it also requires two elements: push factors and pull factors. And for this marginalized population that joining from the West or leaving the West to join a radical extremist group like ISIS, they have their own perceived grievances they have built against their own governments due to certain foreign policy practices, things like the war in Iraq, the perception or the narrative that the West is in war against the Muslim population in the world, and therefore that's an obligation for them to go. Some of these grievances it could be valid. I mean, we're not questioning the legitimacy of these grievances, but they do serve as a push factor, in fact. But that itself is not enough for them to join radical extremist groups if there's no pull factor. Usually, those would be lone wolf terrorists. If they're only push factors, someone feels excluded or someone feels isolated, someone feels discriminated in the West, let's say Canada or United States. Usually, these individuals tend to commit an act of, or what we call lone wolf terrorist act, rather than going to Iraq or Syria or Somalia. In the absence of a pull factor, and in this case would be a recruiter, an active recruiter that ISIS has heavily invested in and is very sophisticated in online recruitment, I don't really see marginalization contributes as the main factor. It is a factor, but it's not the main factor into joining radical extremist groups, because instead, as seen in the Aaron Driver case in Canada, for example, they tend to act as lone wolf terrorists rather than joining the group. And I don't know if you have something else to add to that.
I'll be happy to, but I don't want to dominate.
Well, let's move on to the next question, because this also might be answered by both you, Haval, and Anne. And it's from Roy. Roy is asking, from the perspective of former ISIS members pursuing de-radicalization, what is their concept of de-radicalization? What are the ways that would help them facilitate their reintegration into society? That's from Roy. So I'll hand that over to both of you. That might be something.
Do you want to go first, Sam?
Sure. I would just say that I don't think that they have a concept of de-radicalization. They just have a concept of what they hope for in their own lives. And they don't want to sit in prison in Syria. They hate it. They hate the camps if they're women. They're worried about their children. The men are worried about their wives and children in the camps. They want to be reunified. They want to be able to see their family members. And when they speak to me, some of them are lying, but a lot of them sound like, I'm just done with this. And what I see is that they've aged out too. That when they came, they were young men ready to fight, and they got married while they were in ISIS and had children. And now they have other concerns. They're worried about their families. They're not hot-headed young men anymore. But I don't think that they know what will de-radicalize them. My view is they have to understand what they took part in. They have to take responsibility. So not only see themselves as a victim, but also to take responsibility for what they did and look at what were those push and pull factors and reorient themselves to better things. So a lot of them say that they, like a guy will say, I got tired of my wife being spit on for wearing niqab. Or women will say, I didn't feel that I could really follow my religion in Europe. And now they've totally changed their view and said, I understand what it is to live in a totalitarian society. And I can worship in my home country. And they also, the ones that are ideologically indoctrinated, need scholarly help to get out of it because they've been convinced by ISIS scholars that somehow ISIS is Islamic. So I'm working with a guy in Canada right now that says that he still is confused by that. And I've told him, look, Islam is a good religion. There's so much good in Islam. You don't ever throw that away, but you throw away all this killing and horror and terrible things, and you have to separate it out. You didn't have that opportunity. And now that you're have so much PTSD, you can't even think straight, because the trauma is always interrupting your thought process. And I've talked to many people that were in ISIS that said it took me a whole year to get out of the ideology. Some with the help of an Islamic scholar, some just sorting through themselves. And keep in mind that these people do get stalked. They get stalked by terrorist groups. So an Iraqi kid that was in a refugee group, his Emir called him up and said, you will come back to us and you will work for us. So that's probably enough from me.
Maybe I could add something quickly there.
Yeah, absolutely.
From what Anne was saying, this feeds into another aspect of what we look at in our report. I didn't really have time to speak about, which is about, this idea of spreading a different form of Islam. And I think, to go on from what Anne has said, it's of course true that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, no? And all these things different things we've been talking about today, these are all different ways to deal with the same problem. And let's say, for example, if in whole camp you have millions and millions of pounds of funding, and you can open one-to-one consultation sessions for anyone who wants to go and discuss, still probably most of the people aren't going to go to that because they're not interested. So you have to find multiple ways, and it's not just about one kind of session or one kind of training or having the best psychologists or something. There are many factors to consider in terms of what would be the most effective thing of reaching ISIS. Ultimately I think what Anne is saying is true, is that it will come from a theological basis. No, that it's not about saying give up on all that Islam and become a radical feminist or whatever. That's not really practical. Maybe that can happen too, or that as well, but the programs which maybe I think of all the things we're talking about in our report can be the most important are these ones of training religious teachers, training imams. There is a new academy here in North and East Syria that is training imams that will then go into these regions and at least really try and reach people by being the ones that are teaching in the mosques. I know that radical preachers will also have been removed from mosques here in North and East Syria if they are preaching something that's along ISIS lines. That's not seen as acceptable. What of course is completely acceptable for this Muslim region is to follow your religion, to go to the mosque, but if the message that's being taught there is a positive one, I think that is the thing which perhaps has the biggest potential to have an impact in terms of people who follow ISIS.
Okay, thanks so much, Thomas. And I have another question for Haval from Malina Rembe. She's asking, do you mean the Syrian children or all children? The self-administration have stated they will never separate mothers from children and have not so far demonstrated any will to separate Syrian mothers and children. Expat boys are separated and placed in the military juvenile detention camp, for example, Al-Hor. But I know of only a few Syrian cases. Haval, could you answer that?
Yes, that's a good question. And Melon, I was talking generally about what needs to be done, and you're absolutely right. Only those who were referred to, or hardcore children and youth were referred to as the cops of the caliphate, were actually placed in Al-Hori Center, which Thomas talked about in his report. And those are the very high risk children and youth, and they stay within that camp until they age out, and then they'll be working either on employment opportunity or returning that individual to his or her family. On a larger scale, it hasn't been practiced yet, so no, children are not being separated from their families. Simply because of due to lack of a framework, or an agreeable framework where everyone could agree on within, and here I'm talking about a legal framework as well, but also a framework that respects the right of the child and the parenthood as well. And research find, and my research finds that it shouldn't be a long-term separation, but a de-radicalization effort or a rehabilitation effort wouldn't be successful if these children go back to the same mothers every night, because everything would be erased and re-brainwashed again. So there hasn't been any large-scale separation as far as we know, but perhaps Mr. Muslim Saleh can speak to that, if there has been any separation on a large scale.
Well, we have some children, they are orphan, so they are separated from them. I mean, just like institutions to teach them is out of the camp. I mean, many orphans are living there, but if they are with their mothers and their families, so you cannot get them back, or you wouldn't separate them. And even there were some cases, just like some countries, in European countries, they wanted to get the children, but without the mothers, because they have dropped their nationality. So this is the problem. And the mother, they don't want to leave their children, I mean, to be separated from them. This is another problem, because, well, if you drop the nationality, they don't want, because they are guilty. So you have to do something about the children. I mean, what you can do. And of course, I mean, they requested the administration to keep the children without the mothers, which is impossible to do that. It's not humanitarian to separate the children from their mother. So this is the problem. I mean, if they want the countries, anyone, I mean, they just want to get the children with their mothers, it's okay. But if you want to get the children without the mothers, so this is the problem. So now there are some, I mean, trying to separate the families from, I mean, those extremists from non-extremists, and so to make some separation in the camps. I mean, just to, I don't know if it's valid till now, or they have done something, but there was some attempt to do it. I mean, to separate the family to their children from the others. I mean, to make some kind of separation in the camp itself. So maybe some NGOs are also they are supporting this. Otherwise, I mean, but they are not looking overall. I mean, the best way is to have the families with their children to their own countries. I mean, but nobody wants to take them back. I mean, this is the problem, big problem.
Can I say something on that? I just like to say thank you, Salah, so much for what you said, and I appreciate that the autonomous administration is so respectful of families. But when we were working in Kamputa, we knew that there were people on the detainee rehabilitation program. We knew that if they went back to their prison, that they were holding Sharia court and they were breaking the arms of people that decided to defect from Al-Qaeda. And this is the same. Some of these children, they are innocent and their mothers are teaching them horrible things. And there is a point in every society, at least in our Western countries, where we do separate children from abusive parents. So if a mother is teaching her child to follow ISIS, I think most of us would agree that's child abuse. And we can legitimately separate them. The other thing is, when Turkey was bombarding the camps, if we're acting in the best interest of the children, it may be that we just have to get the children out of there. You know, that the countries won't take the mothers back, but they will take the children. And these are horrible and hard things. But, you know, like what you said, Thomas, if you take the kids to Al-Hori for a while and separate them from these mothers that are teaching them horrible things. And also, there's no prison in the world that lets you take your teenager with you or lets you take your 8-year-old with you. Usually prisons allow you to have a nursing baby with you and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I have a question from Kirsten Shishka, who's a psychotherapist in Germany, coming in from a long way. She's saying, you spoke of a necessary structured, internationally supported framework for de-radicalization. In your opinion, how should such a framework be linked to the respective national de-radicalization approaches in Germany, Austria, France? What would a desirable link look like? And maybe Haval, you'd like to, I know you've been doing some work comparing as well, de-radicalization programs.
Sure. I think the link between all these initiatives and programs across the globe and Europe specifically should focus on looking at this specific population. We're talking about children and youth here from the lens of victimization lens rather than war criminals or terrorists. And that usually gets done by the incorporation of de-radicalization practices within the mainstream services rather than having them all put in one center or one building and put a big banner, name it the De-Radicalization Center for ISIS terrorists or ISIS children, because by labeling them, we're really not doing them good and de-radicalizing them and reintegrating into society. That link should be addressed across the globe, and other elements should include, and yourself, you're a psychotherapist. Psychotherapy is one of the main elements should be included in any framework for de-radicalization or rehabilitation because of the PTSD these children have been subjected to, whether participating in committing crimes under the ISIS control or witnessing those daily horrific beheadings in public spaces in Raqqa and Mosul. I would also add psych ed assessments and counseling, and religious counseling, and Thomas talked about that as well. Religious counseling is extremely important in this sense because their entire motivation, their entire understanding is based on a preconceived or misinterpreted misinterpretation of the religious text, which has been passed on to them by their mothers and their fathers. So the link is here, differentiate between, or not label, avoid any labeling events or any labeling opportunities that would possibly jeopardize this population, and instead look at this population and these initiatives from a victimization lens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Haval, that's good.
Can I say something about that one?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I? Yes. Well, de-radicalization is, I think, is not only one circle. So you have to follow. It starts from maybe in the society, maybe in Europe or some countries, they start to go to the mosques. I mean, the imams are agents of some countries or some organization, teaching them, capturing them, and then they are sending them to the training camps in somewhere, and they've been trained over there and then sent to the areas which they want. So if you want to de-radicalize those people, we should start from the beginning. I mean, to control those people who are recruiting those people, tying them to the orders of the God on the prophets and so on, then changing their, affecting their mentality and sending them to the training camps. So this change is broken. Maybe we will have some different ways. So it's mainly start from the mosques and the imams, which they are teaching them, catching them, radicalizing them, and then sending them to the camps to be trained and then to be supplied with a weapon or whatever is needed. I mean, weapons or money or so to go somewhere else. So this is, I think we should start from the beginning. For those mosques, imams should be controlled, and then the problem to be solved before they became victims of such radical organizations. So this is the point I can mention.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a lot of questions that remain unanswered on the chat, the Q&A, but we have to close up. I think we'll have one last question, and then Selena will put up some information about the Human Security and Peacebuilding program here. But the last question, I think, is coming from Sarah Glynn. And that is, how much can people help each other escape from the ISIS mindset, and how much does this have to be approached individually? So again, this could be from all respondents. If someone would like to step up for this.
I think Thomas would like to jump.
Hi, sure. So I think in terms of a question of, I think what this question is trying to ask now is to what extent can former ISIS members or those who are themselves have been associated with ISIS play a role. I think maybe some of the other people who have more hands-on experience of de-radicalization work and programs can speak about that. As in general, as I know, it's an effective method. And what I would say that is really being prioritized here is leadership by local people and people with a shared frame of reference and a shared common background. And that goes both for these kind of individual projects that we talked about, these kind of pilot projects in the camps. It's something that I think often is also forgotten in much of the Western discourse about this region, is that the Kurds, quote unquote, are Muslims too. They're all Sunni Muslims as well. And in particular, I think what I would really emphasize is how things are being reorganized and the many different kind of projects that there are in these regions like Deir ez-Zor and like Raqqa. And here, that you will have as much as possible this local leadership, both on the big kind of political level that we talked about a bit in terms of helping people as communities to feel represented, to feel part of this new political paradigm that's being built up here, but also in the very local level and in terms of these interpersonal conversations between for example, particularly the women's movement in its different incarnations is trying out in these regions, but also in the classroom and also, as I said, even in the mosques. And that, I think, is a general principle that is very important and is one of the strengths that the administration can offer. And I think it's also why, when it comes to de-radicalization programs, that, as we've said, these programs are maybe not enough, are not big enough, not systematic enough at the moment. But if there are foreign states and there are NGOs that do feel they can offer something in terms of then that should be done in administration together with the people that have been here, working with these people in their camps for years and years, who have been living together with them in this region for generations. You know, these are the best people to lead these programs. Perhaps some of the others can speak a bit more about the technicalities of what that might look like in a de-radicalization program.
Okay, thanks very much, Thomas. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up there. I think, Selena, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all the panelists. It's an incredibly complex and rich kind of subject for social scientific research, but also research on the ground in the field, and it's ongoing. I often think of de-radicalization is really a kind of a long-term thing, because my feelings are that many of these people who become radicalized and then find out they've got into something that they shouldn't really have gotten into have got probably quite a degree of trauma in their life. If they didn't have trauma in their life going in and thought that this was maybe the solution, they've certainly got trauma coming out of this experience. And so we don't really know the extent to which the de-radicalization occurs. I think it's a really longitudinal approach that we have to take, just as ISIS claims that they're taking the longitudinal, the long approach to things. So it's very important to understand that. But a huge thank you to the very, as one commentator was saying, very enriching discussions and interesting presentations today. And we are going to keep this this recording so people can access the recording in the near future. I just wanted to say a few words about one of the sponsors. We have the School of Humanitarian Studies, of course, at Royal Roads University in Victoria, Canada. And we have different programs, as you can see from the shared slide. I run the Master of Arts in Human Security and Peacebuilding, which is a 2-year master's degree dedicated to creating humanitarians and giving them the professional, practical, and theoretical skills to do peace building and to work in humanitarian action. But we have other programs in conflict analysis and management, disaster and emergency management, and justice studies as well. So if you are interested, and I'm sure we've got quite a few human security students here that have tuned in, and I'm grateful to them for coming in. But if you are interested, please check out the Royal Roads University website. Selena's put some more information up there also, because one thing we really need more of is more people to understand these issues, to work on humanitarian action, and to develop the kind of peace building and cooperation and collaboration that will change things and transform people's lives. And as we've seen, there are a lot of people out there that really require this, and are needing this kind of information, needing to work in these areas, and it's so important. And we've had 4 highly skilled people who are committed and dedicated to resolving some of these conflicts and doing work in these areas where we can get this general context and general ideas out, that we can change things, and that things don't have to be this way. So very important. So just again, I can't thank the panelists too much. We're going to have our 3rd webinar on the region, and coming up probably in late January and early February. And all these recordings will be available. And congratulations, Thomas, with the launch of your report and in the Information Centre. This is fantastic news, and I'm sure this is going to be a huge bonus to people working in the region, and to people who really need that kind of information to do their research and to build these kind of collaborative enterprises. So thank you for that. Selena, do you have anything you'd like to say at the end?
Thanks so much, Ken. Nothing to add on, just echoing a big thank you to everyone from our panelists and you as Haval as host as well for bringing us together for this important dialogue. And as you mentioned, we'll be sure to send the registration page for our third session to everyone who registered for today as well.
Wonderful. That's great. So thanks very much, everyone. And I hope all of you have a very happy holiday. I know the holidays are coming up very soon, but whatever your religion, creed, belief system, I hope you have at least get a chance to have a break over this period, because it's been a very difficult year from everyone's perspective with COVID-19, and we can only hope that it's going to get better in 2021, which I'm sure it is. But all I want to say is stay safe and stay warm, and carry on doing the great work that you're doing, and really appreciate it. So have a great vacation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Mr. Sally.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.